DNA on a pizza crust. In 2018, the Golden State Killer was identified after decades of eluding capture, thanks to DNA found on a discarded slice of pizza. The suspect, Joseph James DeAngelo, had committed at least 13 murders and 50 assaults in California between 1974 and 1986. Investigators used a public genealogy database, GEDmatch, to match crime scene DNA to distant relatives, building a family tree that eventually pointed to DeAngelo. Once he became the prime suspect, surveillance teams followed him to a restaurant in Sacramento. After he ate, DeAngelo tossed a pizza slice and napkins into a public trash bin. Detectives collected the items and sent them to a forensic lab. Technicians extracted a DNA profile from saliva on the pizza crust. It was an exact match to DNA preserved from multiple crime scenes. This single, casually discarded piece of food provided the conclusive physical link needed to arrest him. Without that accidental sample, the case might have remained unresolved, as prior evidence was insufficient for a warrant. The pizza crust became the final piece in a decades-long investigative puzzle.
Dropped grocery receipt.
In 2005, the BTK killer case broke open when police obtained a grocery store receipt dropped by the suspect. Dennis Rader had murdered 10 people between 1974 and 1991 in Kansas, then gone silent. In 2004, he resumed sending taunting letters to media and police. One package contained a floppy disk, traced to a church computer registered to Rader, but authorities still lacked concrete proof linking him to the murders. Surveillance teams began following him closely. During one outing, they watched as Rader left a local store and inadvertently dropped a receipt in the parking lot. Officers retrieved it and cross-referenced the purchase time with store security footage, placing him at the scene. This small but critical piece of evidence confirmed his identity and movements. With the receipt, investigators justified further searches. They collected items from his trash, including a DNA sample from his daughter's medical records, which matched DNA at BTK crime scenes. The chance loss of a receipt ultimately led to Rader's arrest after more than 30 years.
Accidental 911 butt dial.
In 2013, a Florida murder case turned when the suspect accidentally called 911 from his pocket. Scott Simon was involved in a fatal shooting after a traffic altercation in Orlando. Hours later, while helping coordinate the disposal of evidence, his phone activated the emergency dial function in his pocket. The call connected to a dispatcher, who silently listened and recorded several minutes of incriminating conversation. On the recording, Simon discussed the shooting in detail with an associate, referencing the victim, the location, and his role in the crime. He also mentioned hiding evidence, including the murder weapon. This unintentional confession gave police a direct link between Simon and the killing, something they had been unable to establish during initial investigations. Detectives subpoenaed phone records to confirm Simon's location at the time of the murder and matched it to witness statements and physical evidence from the scene. The butt dial, a completely accidental mistake, provided probable cause to arrest him. Without it, the case might have lacked the direct admission needed for prosecution. Neighbor's dog dug up evidence. In 2012, a Detroit missing persons case broke wide open when a neighbor's dog uncovered human remains. The dog's owner noticed the animal returning from a nearby abandoned property with what appeared to be a human bone. Alarmed, the owner called police. When forensic investigators searched the property, they discovered additional remains buried in a shallow grave behind the house. Dental records identified the victim as a woman who had vanished over 20 years earlier. At the time of her disappearance, the property had been occupied by multiple tenants, and initial searches decades earlier had found nothing. With the new discovery, investigators re-examined the case using modern forensic methods. They tracked down former residents, eventually locating a man who had left Detroit shortly after the woman's disappearance. Confronted with fresh forensic evidence tying him to the gravesite, he confessed. The dog's random digging exposed evidence that had gone undetected for decades, finally bringing closure to the victim's family. Traffic stop gone wrong. In 2014, a routine traffic stop in Florida led to the capture of a fugitive wanted for a decades-old murder. The driver, later identified as John Blauvelt, had been living under a false identity since the early 1990s after allegedly killing his wife in South Carolina. A local police officer pulled him over for a broken taillight, intending to issue only a minor citation. When the officer ran the driver's license, the system flagged it as fraudulent. A fingerprint scan at the station revealed a match in the National Crime Information Center database, linking Blauvelt to the outstanding murder warrant. Until that moment, he had successfully avoided detection by moving between states and assuming different names. South Carolina authorities confirmed the match and issued an immediate request for extradition. Investigators reopened the original case, locating preserved physical evidence and witnesses willing to testify. What began as a minor vehicle equipment violation ended with the arrest of a man who had been on the run for over 20 years. Storm unearthed the victim's body. In 2004, Hurricane Ivan's flooding in Florida exposed skeletal remains that solved a decades-old missing persons case. The victim, identified as Cheryl Holland, had vanished in the late 1980s under suspicious circumstances. Despite extensive searches at the time, investigators found no evidence and the case went cold. When the hurricane's heavy rains and high winds eroded the banks of a rural creek, locals discovered human bones lodged in debris. Law enforcement cordoned off the site and forensic anthropologists were brought in to recover and catalog the remains. Dental records confirmed the identity as Holland. The discovery allowed detectives to apply modern investigative techniques. They re-interviewed old witnesses and re-examined existing evidence, leading them to a former boyfriend who had been an early suspect. New forensic testing tied him to the crime, and he was arrested. Without the storm's natural erosion, the remains might have stayed hidden indefinitely, leaving the case unsolved. Facebook photo tagged at crime scene. In 2017, a 5-year-old Pennsylvania murder case was solved after a Facebook tag placed the suspect at the crime scene. The victim, a young woman, had been killed in 2012, and investigators had long suspected a man in her social circle, but couldn't prove his presence at the scene. The break came when a friend tagged him in a photo uploaded years later. The picture was taken the night of the murder, at the exact location where the victim's body was found. Investigators secured a warrant to examine the suspect's social media accounts. Embedded metadata in the image confirmed the time, date, and GPS coordinates matched the murder window. With this digital evidence, detectives confronted the suspect. They also linked him through phone tower data, which placed his device near the location during the killing. The careless social media post gave authorities the missing link they needed to charge him. Without the tag, his alibi might never have been disproven. eBay listing of stolen jewelry. In 2014, a cold case murder from 1983 in California was solved when stolen jewelry appeared for sale on eBay. The victim's family had always suspected certain unique pieces had been taken during the killing. Over the years, they periodically searched pawn shops and online marketplaces. One day, a relative spotted a locket with distinctive engravings that matched items stolen from the victim's home. Police traced the seller's account to a man living in Nevada. When they searched his property, they found additional jewelry belonging to the victim, along with clothing fibers matching the crime scene. DNA analysis from the stolen items matched biological evidence preserved from the 1983 case. The suspect, who had no prior arrests, confessed during questioning. Without the chance online listing, the physical connection between the suspect and the murder scene might never have been uncovered. DNA from a drunk driving arrest. In 2016, a routine drunk driving arrest in Oregon solved a violent assault and murder from 2 decades earlier. The suspect, James Arnold Craig, was stopped at a roadside checkpoint after failing a breathalyzer test. As part of standard felony booking procedures, officers collected a DNA sample using a cheek swab. That sample was uploaded to CODIS, the national DNA database, where it triggered a hit within days. The profile matched evidence from a 1996 case in Portland involving the sexual assault and killing of a young woman. At the time of the original investigation, no suspect had been identified, and DNA technology was less advanced. With the match confirmed, detectives pulled archived evidence and used modern forensic techniques to strengthen the case. They confronted Craig with the genetic evidence and corroborating witness accounts from the original file. The arrest turned a minor traffic offense into the resolution of one of the city's most haunting cold cases. Wrong number confession. In 2008, police in Illinois solved a murder after the killer accidentally left a voicemail on a stranger's phone. The suspect, trying to call a friend, misdialed by a single digit. The voicemail that followed was a detailed account of a recent killing, including where the murder weapon was hidden and specifics about the victim. The recipient immediately contacted police, who traced the call to a local man connected to the victim. Investigators secured a warrant for his phone records and matched his location to the crime scene through cell tower data. The details in the message aligned perfectly with forensic findings, leaving little room for denial. This single misdialed call gave authorities both a confession and investigative direction, allowing them to close a case that had stalled for months. Without the wrong number, the suspect's identity might have remained unknown. Reality TV background shot. In 2011, a murder suspect in the UK was identified after appearing in the background of a live reality TV broadcast. The case dated back to 1998, when a young man was stabbed to death during a street fight. Despite witness statements, the investigation stalled due to lack of physical evidence. Over a decade later, a film crew was shooting a live segment in a busy market square. While reviewing the footage for broadcast, a police officer noticed a man in the crowd who bore a striking resemblance to a composite sketch created years earlier. The clip was re-aired on national news, prompting multiple public tips naming the same suspect. Police tracked him down and collected a DNA sample during questioning. Forensic testing confirmed it matched blood found at the 1998 crime scene. This unexpected appearance on live television reignited an investigation that had been dormant for more than a decade. Loose floorboard in a remodel. In 2015, contractors renovating a century-old home in Ontario discovered human remains concealed beneath a loose floorboard. The crew halted work immediately and contacted police, who brought in forensic teams to process the site. The remains were wrapped in aged blankets, suggesting an attempt to conceal the body during a previous ownership. Dental records identified the victim as a woman who had been missing since 1988. At the time, she had been living nearby, and her disappearance was considered suspicious, but no body had been found. With the new evidence, detectives revisited the case. Interviews with former tenants revealed tensions between the victim and a man who rented the home in the late 1980s. Confronted with the forensic evidence, including trace fibers linking him to the blankets, the suspect confessed. A decades-old mystery had been solved because of an accidental discovery during routine construction work. Lost wallet found in river. In 2019, a fisherman in Missouri pulled an old, mud-caked wallet from the Mississippi River. Inside were a driver's license, credit cards, and membership cards belonging to a man who had been reported missing in 1999 1994. The find was immediately reported to local authorities. Police organized a search of the nearby riverbend. Divers soon located a submerged car partially buried in silt. The license plate matched the missing man's vehicle, which had never been recovered. Inside, they found skeletal remains and personal belongings consistent with the man's last known possessions. Forensic dental records confirmed the identity. Investigators determined he had likely driven off the road during poor nighttime visibility, plunging into the river where the car remained hidden for 25 years. The accidental discovery of the wallet provided the crucial location clue that brought closure to the family and ended decades of unanswered questions.
Hiker stumbled on a shallow grave. In 2017, a hiker in Arizona wandered off a marked trail to photograph the surrounding landscape. While taking pictures, he noticed disturbed earth partially covered by rocks. Curious, he prodded the soil with a stick and uncovered what appeared to be a human skull. The hiker immediately contacted authorities. Forensic teams excavated a shallow grave containing the remains of a woman who had been missing since 2005. Dental records confirmed her identity, and investigators reopened the cold case. Detectives re-examined phone records and interviewed former acquaintances. One suspect, who had moved out of state shortly after her disappearance, was confronted with new forensic evidence linking him to the burial site. He was arrested and charged homicide. Without the hiker's unscheduled detour, the grave might have remained hidden indefinitely.
Thrift store coat with a bullet hole. In 2014, a thrift store in Wisconsin received a donation that contained an unexpected piece of evidence: a men's coat with a patched bullet hole. The store manager noticed the damage was consistent with a gunshot and contacted local police. Forensic testing revealed faint traces of blood inside the lining. Ballistics experts determined the hole matched the caliber and trajectory of a bullet used in a homicide from the 1980s. Investigators traced the donation back to a family cleaning out the home of a recently deceased relative. Records showed the man had been questioned decades earlier about homicide, but was never charged due to lack of evidence. DNA analysis confirmed the blood in the coat belonged to the victim. This new physical evidence provided the missing link, allowing authorities to formally connect the suspect to the crime and close the case after more than 30 years. DNA on a beer can. In 2010, New Hampshire police solved a 20-year-old homicide after collecting DNA from a discarded beer can. Investigators had long suspected a particular man in the 1990 killing of a local woman, but lacked definitive proof. During a community sports event, undercover officers observed the man drinking from a can of beer. When he tossed it into a public trash bin, police retrieved it. Forensic technicians extracted a DNA profile from saliva on the rim, which matched samples preserved from the original crime scene. The match gave prosecutors the physical evidence they needed to charge the suspect. Without that casually discarded can, the case might have remained unresolved, as previous leads had produced only circumstantial evidence.
Google Earth image of a car. In 2019, a decades-old missing persons case in Florida was solved when a submerged vehicle was spotted on Google Earth. A former resident browsing satellite images noticed the faint outline of a car beneath the surface of a retention pond near a housing development. Thinking it might be significant, he contacted local authorities. Divers were dispatched to the site and recovered a heavily silt-covered vehicle. The license plate matched that of a man who had gone missing in 1997 after leaving a late-night gathering. Inside the car, skeletal remains and personal belongings were found, preserved in the water for over 2 decades. Investigators determined the victim likely lost control of his car at night, crashing into the pond. At the time, the area was undeveloped, and the water level hid the wreck from view. The random observation on a publicly available satellite map provided the first solid lead in 22 years, finally solving the case.
Snowplow unearthed a clue. In 2007, a snowplow operator in Michigan inadvertently uncovered a key piece of evidence in a 17-year-old homicide. While clearing a rural roadside after a heavy snowstorm, the plow blades scraped up a rusted revolver buried in frozen dirt. The operator notified police, who sent the gun for ballistic testing. Forensic examiners matched it to shell casings recovered from a 1990 crime scene. Investigators traced the serial number to a man who had been an early suspect but was never charged due to lack of physical proof. With the weapon recovered, modern forensic analysis connected the suspect directly to the killing. Confronted with the evidence, he confessed to the crime. Random mechanical sweep of a snowplow had uncovered the crucial link needed to close a case that had been cold for nearly 2 decades. Family tree search gone wrong. In 2018, a decades-old homicide was solved after a family genealogy search inadvertently exposed the killer. Detectives had preserved DNA from a 1980s assault homicide had no matches in criminal databases. Investigators uploaded the profile to a public genealogy site where it matched to a distant cousin of the unknown suspect. By constructing a detailed family tree, detectives narrowed their list to a handful of potential male relatives. One became the primary focus after records showed he had lived near the crime scene at the time. Surveillance teams followed him and retrieved a coffee cup he discarded in a public bin. DNA from the cup was a direct match to the crime scene evidence. The man was arrested and later confessed. What began as a recreational family tree search by a distant relative ended in the identification of a killer who had evaded capture for over 30 years.
Repaired watch at a pawn shop.
In 2011, a cold case from the 1990s was cracked when a pawn shop sent a watch in for repair. The jeweler noticed the serial number had been filed off, but was still partially legible under magnification. They contacted police, who restored the number using a forensic etching process. The serial number matched property stolen during a 1994 homicide. Investigators traced the pawn transaction back to a man with prior burglary arrests. When questioned, he claimed he had owned the watch for years, but DNA DNA recovered from the watch band matched biological evidence for crime scene. With this physical link, detectives were able to charge the suspect with crime. The routine act of sending a watch for repair had revived a case that had gone cold for nearly 2 decades.